Have you ever been to a town, village, truck stop, gas station, diner, etc. during a road trip that just didn't feel right? Like time seemed to pass differently there, or the people there gave you the creeps? What was your experience there? Coatesville, Pennsylvania. I was with a friend who had come up from Mexico and we were staying a few nights at his grandmother's ranch nearby. Coatesville was the only town around where we could find Mexican ingredients. This is an old steel town that feels post-apocalyptic. Everyone there didn't really seem to be doing anything or going anywhere. It was so creepy. The store we ended up going to had nearly empty shelves and I think the guys were a bit surprised to see us there. All in all, just very strange and eerie. I used to live in that area. Coatesville is creepy as frick for sure. People just standing around eerily. I used to live in southern Africa and we did charity work in a lot of very remote, rural areas. And when I say remote, I mean several hours rough driving on roads that can barely be called roads. Many times we would come across settlements that were not on any map. Just a collection of cinder block and mud houses, sometimes well off the road. Usually these were what we called working villages, as in there is some work site, maybe a small brickwork, or farm, or something like that nearby. Though when I say near, the workers could be walking an hour or so to where they need to be. When we would stumble upon places like this, we would stop, find coordinates and landmarks, make some records and pass it along back to our office. One day, we are working in the area near the borders of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and we see some smoke well off the road. Thinking it may be a village, we decide to go off-road to take a look. It was fairly well hidden, behind a small hill, and from the road you would have never known it was there if it were not for the column of smoke on the horizon. We get to it, and sure enough it looks like one of these unmarked working villages, maybe 10 or so huts, but something seemed very off. It took a second and we realized that there was no one around, and yet it seemed as if whoever lived there was there only moments before. We head to where the smoke came from, and it was a large bonfire. When we looked closer, we noticed bones in it, goat and cattle bones. Other than the sound of the fire, there was not a peep from anything else. Once I stepped out of our truck to get a closer look, I had this overwhelming sense that I was being watched from afar, and that I was not welcomed here. The other guys in the truck said they felt the same, and that we needed to go, so we did. A couple of weeks later when we were driving back, curiosity got the better of me and I decided I wanted to check the site again. This time, however, the village was stripped bare. Anything that could be taken was gone. All that was left was the shells of the huts and a black patch of ash where the fire was. There was one thing that was still there though, the sense of being watched. We didn't stay any longer and never went back. You were being watched. They saw your vehicle coming and cleared out and hid. Dunno what they were up to or why they were so entrusting, but I feel confident that's the case. Gary, Indiana. I got off the highway to get gas. Driving through the city was like a post-apocalyptic movie complete with burned out cars. Crazy guy in underwear walking down the middle of the street with a baseball bat and all the windows were broken or boarded up. I stopped at a gas station and then guy came out and said, "Get back on the highway, son. It's not safe here." I had enough gas to get to a safer rest stop to refuel. This was around 1994 to 1995. Gary really is Thunderdome in the modern world. Best avoided altogether. This is my girlfriend's story but is kinda up the alley of what you are asking for. My partner went to Florida with her family when she was younger and they were driving around trying to find some food until they found a Chinese restaurant and they went in and had some food. There were no other customers. Lots of staff. Everyone seemed very tense but the food was great. They left and had a lovely rest of their day. During breakfast the next morning they turned on their telly and the news showed the place they had eaten and they were like, "Wow, look, we went there." Then the story started and it turns out no more than 10 minutes after they left there was a massive shoot up and they all killed one another. Turns out that the ignorant British tourists just sat in between some kind of Asian turf war. I wish these idiot tourists would leave already so we can start our shootout. Rude. I had the reverse sort of experience at my local supermarket. I live in Australia and we have right-hand drive cars. I'm just finishing my shop when a huge American looking SUV pulls awkwardly into the car park and it's clearly left-hand drive and maybe 10 years old. I like cars so I'm curious about it. And that's when I notice it's got US plates on it. Now these aren't some novelty limited edition Aussie plates that look American. These seem to be genuine US plates. They had a state on them. Can't remember which one, but it was like Michigan or something. Obviously American. Middle-aged woman gets out, looking like it's a normal day at the shops. So far the story is a bit weird, but nothing too unusual. But as I take my trolley back to the trolley bay, she's there and having obvious problems working out how to unlock one. You have to put a coin in them. And she's clearly having troubles, so I ask if I can help. She's trying to put what I'll later find out is a quarter in the trolley, saying she's never seen this sort of thing before. I show her the dollar coin I've just gotten back from my trolley. It's gold colored, and she genuinely is weirded out by the color and is incredulous when I tell her it's $1. I feel like I'm an alien showing her a new type of cat or something. I put my dollar in the trolley lock and open it for her because she's clearly lost and I wanted to be helpful. She then sort of gets into a "oh I know this" interaction and says "let me give you some money" and opens her purse. It's all American notes. Trust me, there's no good old Aussie plastic multi-shade Monopoly money in this thing. I sort of blurt out, "do you not have Australian money yet?" thinking that's gonna slow you down in the Aldi there, love. Her reply, "no, why would I?" and she gives me the quarter she was trying to put in the trolley. I tell her it's not necessary, but she thanks me in her wonderful American accent and wanders off into the shop. It was hilarious and weird. If you'd shown me a portal from my shops to Michigan that she'd blundered through, it would have made complete sense. I got the impression she had almost no idea she was in another country. She was acting like I was the weird one. But she also spoke perfectly and was really nice, so it's not like she was in any obvious mental health episode. The fact I have the quarter is the only reason I don't think I've hallucinated the whole thing after eating a dodgy pizza. Friends think her husband had gotten a job in Australia and just got the car and everything etc shipped. And maybe she's never been overseas before. It was super weird and I love that woman so much. I wish I could find her again to see what she's doing now. I've also been into a country town where literally everyone we saw for the half hour we were there looked like they were from the same family, and everyone stared at us like they knew we were from out of town. But that has a very logical but no less creepy explanation. Okay, this one is so weird, lol. What? She either fell through a portal and ended up on the other side of the planet with her SUV, or she legit doesn't know she's in Australia. And I don't know which explanation I'd prefer, Mayo. I hope you get to meet her again, haha. My boyfriend and I had a stay in Melbourne for a few nights. First Airbnb was practically a small hotel room, so all good. The second, on the other hand, it was advertised as flexible check-in, but the owner wouldn't stop pestering us for a time we were going to be there. We told them 8 PM and they still kept asking before saying they had to go out and Frank would let us in. We had no mention of this guy before then, but fine. Whatever. We ended up missing a few small shows we were eager to go to, so we'd get there earlier, and despite being promised off the street parking, we could only park on the street. It sucked, but no big deal. We'd had a long day and were pretty tired. Then we get to the house. Frank is this tall, thin, muscly older guy, really intense and absolutely no chill. Bulging eyes, kind of intense. We were both really uncomfortable from the start, but my BF makes small talk, jokes about Sydney versus Melbourne. This guy doesn't like it, to the point where he stopped walking, swung around and got in my BF's face. BF de-escalated the situation real quick and we got to our room and immediately locked the door. We both got some bad vibes off the place and the guy, but we couldn't work out why. We thought we were just tired but kept debating the pros and cons of staying, and the room wasn't helping. It was freshly painted and the fumes were so strong I was getting a migraine. There was a door to the backyard that was blocked off with a dresser. So much dust under the bed it was ridiculous. And then we noticed two things. One was the wooden plank holding up the curtains. It was big, thick, heavy looking thing, and it was holding onto the wall by a nail on each side. Half of it had already leant right off the wall, leaving a huge gap. This was right above the head of the bed. That was it for my BF. He wanted out. This second point was my big thing. The door to the rest of the house had a lock, but there was also a gap between it and the floor. I'm not talking a small space for air. I'm not talking fit a finger underneath. I'm talking big enough for tall, muscly, big guy Frank to fit his entire arm under. We grabbed our things and snuck out, went to the nearest grocery store for supplies, shopped around for a place to stay, let the Airbnb know we all left, and ended up driving through the night back to NSW and slept in the car for a few hours. Nothing exciting happened, but we just really didn't feel safe there. My BF hikes a lot overseas, stays in random and or desolated places. He's not put off easily. We were both pretty glad for a solid reason to leave. Mate's Motel. I was on a road trip on the South Island of New Zealand, and one night at around 9 PM decided to stop in a small town to get some rest. Already while driving into the town I noticed that there were Christmas decorations everywhere, like decorated trees and plastic Santas, reindeer etc. Excessive amounts of decorations on the streets and in every window. This wouldn't have been too weird if it hadn't been in the middle of August. But I thought the town was just really dedicated to a specific aesthetic or whatever. I got to the motel and checked in, and the old lady at the front desk was short and rude with me, which I thought was weird. BC I had experienced people in NZ as really nice and quite chatty, compared to where I come from, lol. She also wouldn't give me the Wi-Fi password even though they advertised free Wi-Fi. She quite literally told me to pee off and let her get back to her newspaper. After that I went out, and the whole time I was there I never saw any people on the street. I went to a diner near the motel, both also stuffed with Christmas decorations, and had the same experience with the waitress while ordering. She told me they are out of almost everything and the only I was able to get was a cheese sandwich. There were other people in the restaurant who were all eating what I suppose were meals from the menu. They didn't have to order a plain cheese sandwich. While waiting for my food I noticed that no one in the whole diner was talking, even though there were families and other groups of people. Even the kids ate in silence, or not really silence, as there was Christmas music blaring. After I was done eating I just paid and left. I was also the only one leaving. No one in that diner, the whole time I was there, got up to leave or go to the bathroom or do anything really. They all just sat there. When I left I felt like they were all starting holes in my back. The whole time I was in that town I got a feeling that everyone wanted me to leave and like they were somehow angry with me. This was 4 years ago, and TBH I don't remember anything after leaving the diner. I don't remember going back to the motel or going to sleep, and just barely remember being on the road early the next morning. I told some of my NZ friends this story. BC I thought it was some kind of weird themed town, but none of them ever heard of it, and I can't for the life of me remember the name of that town or how I found it. My girlfriend and I went to an Airbnb in a town called Tiger, Georgia to see a bunch of her old college friends. There was one other couple who got there about the same time we did. By day the cabin looks pleasant enough, 3 stories of rustic comfort with a hot tub overlooking the forest and sunrise. We didn't get there by day. We got there as the sun was sinking low. Rooms seemed to shrink and tighten. The stairwells were only as wide as a single body, and at the bottom of the basement stairs, a rug hid a padlocked trapdoor. It felt like the start of a horror movie. We're trying to ignore the weird vibes and decide to go to dinner. We spent nearly an hour driving around searching for a place to eat. Steakhouses closed by 7 PM. An Italian joint which was now someone's house. A Mexican eatery now abandoned and overgrown with vines. Finally we find something. It's suitably called the Last Dive Bar on Earth, and it's sitting on the edge of a retention pond. The parking lot is full of pickup trucks all festooned with old political bumper stickers from the late 90s and early 2000s. We head in. It's like we've entered another decade, but the beer is good. They have pizza, and the prices aren't bad. We eat in a hurry and get out of there. As we get back to the cabin, the other couples are there and talking about how they had such a nice time in town. It was only by daylight at the end of the weekend that as we descended the mountain we found a ton of local shops and restaurants that I swear to fricking God were not there the first night. On the first night, the electrical outlets in the house fried my phone, leaving me with no way to contact the outside world. The weekend ended up being nice, but the entire time we all felt like we had fallen through a crack into someone else. I was traveling through Arkansas with my friend in the army. He was a big old black dude and I was a medium height white dude. Everyone in McDonald's literally stopped and just stared at us until we ordered food and left. It was super weird and we made sure to bypass a place on the way back to post. I went to a catfish place in rural Arkansas 2007-ish. Tar paper shack in back nowhere. 50/50 black white clientele. Evenly divided in the center of the building. Great fish. Yep. Stopped in a no-name town in Texas for gas. Bunch of guys wearing nothing but denim hanging out in front of the gas station. Denim. Cowboy hats. Cowboy boots. It wasn't just a lot of people. Everyone was wearing that. Their drawls were so thick I could barely understand what they were saying to one another. A lot of hooting and hollering. About 50 yards away, there was a guy sitting under a tree. He was wearing a black and white striped jumpsuit and was chained to the tree by a shackle on his leg. Didn't see any law enforcement around. Maybe they dropped him off. A girl with huge T1.5 arms and an eye patch complimented my car and smiled at me when I was pumping gas. I saw a cow trotting down the side of the road. No one seemed to be chasing it. The fact it was twilight seemed to make everything surreal. I unasked myself from that place as quickly as I could. Sounds like there was a rodeo or something that night and everyone had just left. Back in 2011, my ex and I took a trip to go visit my dad, who at the time lived in the tiny town of Middleton, Tennessee. I lived at the other end of the state, so it was about an 8-hour trip. Decided to go it at night so I wouldn't have to deal with anyone on the interstate other than truckers and the occasional car. The trip was fine until we got off the interstate and went through some small town maybe an hour or so before Middleton. My memory's hazy on exactly where it was, but at that point it was about 4 in the morning. We were rolling through the town, and it was foggy and dark. Minimal street lights. All the houses were completely dark and still. It was a little creepy looking but nothing really out of the ordinary. Until we got a little further down the road and there were freaking newspapers everywhere. Scattered all on the road. In the empty fields and the yards of the houses we passed. Just loose pages of newspaper everywhere we looked. I'm sure there was a reasonable explanation, but both of us just suddenly felt like something was off. And it was creepy as heck. One of us cracked a joke about suddenly landing in a horror movie without realizing, and I sped up the car a little bit, but for about 10 minutes it was just us and the newspapers and the fog and the complete stillness in this dark town, and we both sighed audibly in relief once it fell behind us. We talked about it for years after that trip. On a second trip to the same town years later, once again in the early hours, we stopped at a gas station I always stopped at, and though I'd always felt safe at it before, that time I felt a little uneasy, but didn't know why. We went in the store and this group of guys and a girl came in yelling at this other guy. Cashier made them leave and they tore out. Came back not 5 minutes later and beat the guy they'd been harassing with some kind of bat. It was a mess. Cops were called. Ambulance. I'll never forget how dazed that poor guy looked with blood coming all down the side of his head. So I guess that time I had a legit reason for things feeling off. TLDR. I should stop making the trip from East TN to West TN. On my first trip to Europe, we started in Rome and drove down to Sicily, and on the way back north, we decided to stay the night in a small town instead of a major city. We ended up at a town called Lauria right on dark, and hadn't booked any accommodation yet. We didn't know where we were going to end up, wanted to get as far as we could. As we drive around the town looking for a hotel, every local is stopping in their tracks and watching us like we are very out of place. We find and pull up at the only hotel we could find, a multi-level building with an empty car park, no guests or staff around. Went in and booked a room, and the guy who served us took our bags, put us in the elevator and sent us on the way to our room. We get up 3 floors and here he is waiting for us with our bags, not puffed out having outran an elevator while carrying 3 bags. It's the classic horror movie hallways, seemingly too long for the building and only half the lights are working. It's dead quiet inside so we put our stuff in the room and get out to see if the town is really that bad. We head out for dinner, again every stopping and staring at us as we walk down the streets. The next morning, we wake up early to GTFO and find all the doors are locked and cannot be opened from the inside without a key. No staff anywhere so we left the key on the desk and had to break out of the hotel window to get out. 10/10 was spooked. Rest of the trip was amazing. Through Switzerland and France. Quick trip around England and Scotland then home. On a road trip with my parents in the mid-90s, we spent the night in a small city. My parents picked it simply because it was roughly halfway from our origin to our destination and the hotel was a reasonable rate. Pulling off the interstate, it was clearly a post-industrial city. Big factory buildings everywhere, all of them closed up and fenced off. The hotel attendant was very slow, and our room wasn't much to speak of, but it was just an overnight. We looked in the phone book for restaurants, copied down the address of 3 places, and set off for dinner. We couldn't find the first place. We got on the right street and followed it from one end of town to the other with no sign of it. The second place we found, but was closed for good. The third place looked absolutely awful from the outside and we didn't even go in. The town felt completely abandoned. My parents decided to go to the hotel restaurant. The hotel restaurant was almost empty except for 2 tables of ATF agents, identifiable because they were all wearing their navy blue t-shirts with yellow ATF on the back. Not surprisingly, the restaurant was out of nearly everything on the menu. A few minutes after sitting down, the fire alarm went off. Nobody moved, not the ATF guys, not the restaurant staff. A few minutes later it stopped, then a few minutes after that it started again. Again nobody moved. The fire department rolled up, but nobody seemed concerned. The waitress said that the fire alarm system always went off a few times a day. We managed to spend the night. The fire alarm went off a few more times but not while we were sleeping. We left as soon as we could. Wife and I were driving up the Blue Mountains, big mountain range in Australia, to visit friends who were staying in a holiday place up there. It's crazy foggy in the late afternoon early evening, so we can't see much as we're going up. But it's pretty much a straight run up, so we take it slow and pull over sometimes when the fog gets too thick to give it a minute to lighten a bit. Super creepy but nothing weird. That's just how it is. We stayed the night at friends and drove back down the next afternoon, lovely and sunny. We drove through a cute little town that hugged the sides of the main road, so you could drive straight through it without turning or hitting any major intersections. My wife said, "Oh, are we going home a different way?" No, we were not. There was basically an entire small town we'd driven through the night before right near the house and we never saw a single indication of it. We hadn't seen any lights, streetlights, other cars, "Welcome to Spookyville," Pop 1 signs, anything. We had pulled over to check the map, pre-smartphones, to make sure we hadn't missed a turnoff and we would have been practically in the middle of the town. It's amazing how something so big can disappear in the fog so easily. Early evening and not one house light. Mole people, I reckon. I know there's a logical explanation, but it's 20 years later and I still think nah, not going back up there. Would have been Laura. Beautiful town but so packed with tourists all the time. There was one time I stopped in a gas station in Appalachia. It was like 11 PM on a Friday. So this truck pulled in and the woman ran inside to pick up some stuff. The dude hops out and puts the tailgate down and starts playing the harmonica. Out come like 5 cats who all dance around him like he was a Pied Piper or something. After a couple of minutes the woman came back and he told the cats to get back in the bed of the truck and then they drove off. I am a skeptical person, but this one experience I had in Berlin still confuses me to this day. Me and my girlfriend were on holiday walking through central Berlin. A weekday morning. The streets were fairly busy. A typical day, when we turned down a long wide street with large buildings on either side. As we walked down we noticed it was very quiet and that there was no one else on the street at all, which was strange in itself considering it was 10:11 AM. As we carried on walking, I can't really describe what happened, but I noticed that the buildings we were walking past weren't actually real, but like movie set buildings. The windows and doors looked normal from a distance, but up close they were way too big to be normal. I just felt really uneasy the whole time, but we didn't say anything until we turned off the street and back into the hustle and bustle of Berlin. I have absolutely no idea what happened at all, but my girlfriend said she felt seen exactly the same thing. It was like we stepped into a different world for a few minutes. Totally bizarre. It might have actually been a movie set. Evidently there's an alley in New York City that's the set for many movies that film New York alleys, despite that area of NYC having very few. I'm sure a big city like Berlin is also the set for movies, both local and international. I have a few, but this one stands out in my mind. This starts with me, my boyfriend, his brother and the girlfriend all deciding to split off from the rest of his family during vacation and head to the Winchester mystery house. Now since this is like 6 or 7 years ago, I can't remember if we were headed to or back from there. I was driving and my BF was the navigator. We started our trek a few hours before and expected to be at our destination before nightfall. Somewhere along the lines we took a wrong turn, although we had a map and both are set to GPS. I didn't think about it at first and nobody else mentioned it until what felt like a few hours of me driving. Now this wasn't in silence. From what I remember, it was a normal but road trip with taking, laughing and music. But we get down this particular road and it all feels like we snapped out of a dream. Everything is dark, there's shadows of trees bunched here and there along the road, but past that is pitch black. I'm taking a void of darkness where you feel it goes on for miles on end but you can't see it. One of them said something along the lines of "Where are we?" and joked that we entered the twilight zone. But I tell you, I got this really uneasy feeling like I shouldn't drive any further than I already have, and I think everyone else felt that too, cause we got real quiet and just kinda stared out the windows. We hadn't realized that there were literally no cars around us. What was supposed to be a highway was a narrow strip of road and nothing. Just this stillness, like we entered a place we shouldn't have. I flip a B and start speeding off in the opposite direction, but lo and behold, the scenery we saw going back wasn't the same as we saw coming in. It was still pitch black, but none of it was familiar. You know how you can make out odd shapes from the shadows, but literally nothing looked like it was before. It took me about a good 15 or 20 minutes to get out of the void, but to this day every one of us swears we were driving 4 hours in it. We can't find that turn, although we've taken that route a few more times TBT throughout the year. And it really does seem like it was a dream, except for the waking part. It was scared me. It's like everyone was stuck on autopilot and no one remembers what we said or even what sounds we heard during those hours. It gives me the creeps. I have 2 stories like this. The first one was an absolutely creepy experience, and the second one was weird, but I didn't feel threatened. First story. A friend and I were driving in a thunderstorm of epic proportions. We couldn't see the road ahead of us, so we pulled over to a diner in a tiny town and decided we'd wait inside for the storm to pass and order some food. From the outside it looked really lively. People were talking, laughing and eating. As soon as we walked through the door, the whole place went silent and every single person stopped what they were doing and just stared at us. Dozens of eyeballs fixated on us. We ordered our food and ate it, and left as soon as the weather had cleared up a bit. We were there for maybe an hour, and it stayed completely silent the entire time, and customers kept looking our way, not discreetly. Second story. Another time I was on a road trip. It was the middle of the night and we were getting tired, so we decided to stop in the next town. There had been no sign of civilization for miles and we finally came across a small town with a B&B. The woman running the place was odd but very kind. The house felt different somehow, but so did the whole town. It kind of felt like I had entered a different dimension, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I go to bed and the next morning I wake up and decide to walk around the town a bit before we hit the road. Again, the whole place felt like a different world, like it was not part of the earth we normally know. The people living there were tending to their gardens, walking their dogs, etc. And it felt like slow-mo. There were 2 shops in town, and no other businesses. By going into the shops and looking around, and taking with one of the shop owners, I found out the whole town was a pagan town where every single citizen worshipped a goddess of fertility, as in human fertility, but also fertility of their crops. The stores were packed with items that can be used for rituals, and other various items like statuettes representing the goddess. They seemed to be hardcore worshippers. Their town wasn't on the map and I never found it again. It was a really surreal experience. I was on a road trip to go to Tallahassee with 2 of my cousins and my mom. Like halfway between A and B, the driver he has to go pee, so we decided to stop in the next no-name rest stop settlement. As soon as we drove in, I immediately felt something was wrong. The cars that were driving were all banged up and looked like they came straight from the 70s. Confederate flags in a couple of places, ran down shanty looking houses, lots of Confederate flags. The American flags that were around were pretty banged up and or torn. The people stared at us as we drove past by, and everyone just looked dead inside. Honestly, if someone told me that there was a Klan rally right up the street, I would 100% believe them. That's the kind of vibe I got from this place. So my cousin pulls into this decent looking rest stop gas station and jogs into the bathroom. While my mom and my other cousin were knocked out, I decide to go in the stop with the intentions of going in, getting a snack, and getting out. As soon as I walk in, it feels like time stopped and everyone that I can see is staring at me. It felt like something out of a horror movie NGL. Luckily for me, there were a pile of apples near the door, so I moved my way there, and then I noticed a few people around me stopped dead in their tracks just to look at me. For example, their like hands were still on the items, and this man even stopped reading his little cereal box to stare at me. Since I'm black, this place wasn't sitting well with me at all. I put back the apple I was holding and I casually walked out. No need to cause a scene or anything, without getting anything. Frick, that place. When my cousin came back, we booked a TF out of there. There is a town in South Missouri that my family and I drove through, named Humansville. We had to stop for gas, so we pulled in and everyone was either walking their dog, smoking a cig or talking with their 8 doppelgangers in the same wife beaters and blue jeans on the porch of an apartment. It was quite small, less than 10 streets, I don't know. We only passed a few then went back onto the highway. Everyone stopped to stare at us as we got gas and my mother felt weird walking back to the car. The fact that there is a town called Humansville is the most terrifying part of that. It's like they're trying too hard to convince you. Also there's a place outside of town called Gobbler's Knob, with the helpful Google review of best knob in Humansville. Make of that what you will. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.